Millionaire's deaf daughter nearly killed in brutal home invasion. But a dog exposes the truth. You won't believe what happened in this seemingly ordinary family home. A baby who had never said a word, who had never reacted to anything, found her voice on the scariest night of all, when armed bandits tried to break into the mansion. It was dawn. The piercing silence was broken by a crack of glass. The father, Daniel. He woke with a start. His heart raced as he heard heavy footsteps coming from the living room. He bolted upright, realizing something terrible was happening. "Julia, get the baby," she whispered, trembling. The frightened wife ran to her daughter's room. In the crib, the girl was awake, clutching her pink blanket tightly, but she wasn't crying, wasn't screaming. As always, she lived in absolute silence, oblivious to the world. The dog, Max, newly adopted, rose from the rug and began to growl low. His hackles raised. He knew there was danger even before Daniel opened the hallway door. A sharp crash, the living room window shattered. 2 hooded men entered, armed with iron bars. Tension spread like poisonous smoke through the house. Daniel breathed deeply, sweat dripping down his forehead. He had never imagined he would be face to face with criminals in his own home. He tried to move silently, but the dog rushed in first, barking so loudly it echoed off the walls. And it was at that moment that something impossible happened. The baby, previously motionless, turned her head sharply. Her eyes widened, fixed on the dog. Her tiny arms reached out toward the animal, and a sound came from her mouth, a sound her parents had never heard before. Ba, ba. Julia almost let the child slip from her arms in shock. "Daniel, she said something." But there was no time to celebrate. The bandits were already advancing down the hallway. The dog, poised for attack, barked even louder. With each deep bark, the baby responded with squeals and giggles, as if finally finding a way to communicate amidst the chaos. Daniel's heart almost stopped. Oh my God, she's reacting to the dog. She listens to him. As danger approached, amidst screams, footsteps, and Max's ferocious barking, the baby laughed and tried to imitate the deep sounds. It was as if, for the first time, the silence had been broken, not by the parents, not by the doctors, but by the inexplicable bond with that animal. The bandits retreated for a moment, frightened by the dog's fury. Daniel took the opportunity to push Julia and the baby into the room and lock the door. His heart was pounding like a drum, but something inside him burned stronger than fear. Revelation. The daughter he believed lived in a distant, isolated world had just responded. And the reason was astonishing. "She's not mute. She's not completely deaf," he murmured in shock. "She can only hear him, only him." And in that dark corridor, surrounded by danger, Daniel understood that destiny had placed that dog in their lives for a reason much greater than they could have imagined. And before we continue this unbelievable story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching this video from right now? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to stay tuned for the next chapters of this thrilling and twist-filled plot. Months before the invasion, life in that house was already marked by a heavy shadow. Silence. Isabella, Daniel and Julia's baby, was almost a year old and still didn't speak, babble, or respond to calls. Her squeaky toys remained intact, and her parents' smiles were unrequited. She seemed to exist in a world of her own, unreachable. Daniel spent hours trying to get her attention. He clapped his hands, made faces, imitated funny voices. Nothing. "Julia, she doesn't look at me. She doesn't even seem to be listening to me," he said, his voice trembling with frustration. The mother, always trying to calm the situation, responded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's just late. Every child has their own time." But deep down, Julia knew something was wrong. Her daughter's distant gaze stabbed like an invisible knife. The doctors were no help. At each appointment, they only gave cold sentences. Let's wait a little longer. Maybe it's just a phase. Try different stimuli. Nothing worked. Time passed, and the feeling of despair grew. Daniel became more impatient. One night, after yet another failed attempt to play with his daughter, he exploded. "This isn't normal. Julia, she's not a late bus. She's our daughter." "And she's lost." Julia brought her hands to her face, crying softly. "Don't say that. She needs us." "Do you need us?" Daniel slammed his hand on the table, knocking over a glass. "She doesn't even realize we exist." The silence that followed was worse than any argument. In the room, the baby stared at the ceiling, oblivious to the sound of the fight, as if the world around her had no meaning. The nights were the most painful. Julia would sit on the edge of the crib, watching her daughter sleep. Sometimes she would sing softly, hoping her mother's voice would penetrate that invisible barrier. But Isabella didn't react. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just turned her little face away and remained distant. Daniel, in the living room, spent hours researching online. He read articles about experimental therapies, miracle diets, and expensive devices. None of the answers seemed realistic, until one morning, exhausted, he came across something unexpected, a simple ad, almost lost amidst so many texts. Wanted for a home, docile dog, cream retriever mix, calm eyes. The photo showed an animal with a serene gaze, as if understanding the weight of the world. Daniel stared at that image for minutes, unsure why. Something in him tightened, as if that dog could offer an answer that medicine couldn't. When Julia woke up and saw her husband obsessed with the screen, she frowned. "A dog? Do you think a dog will solve it?" "I don't know," Daniel replied, tired but firm. "I just know she needs something different. Something alive. Someone who doesn't judge, who just is there." Julia shook her head in despair. "We can't handle her already. And you want to bring another problem?" Daniel looked up, and his voice was filled with pain. "The problem is, Julia, she seems afraid of us, as if we didn't exist. I can't just wait for this to work itself out." The couple fell silent. Outside, the dawn continued indifferently. Inside the house, the weight of uncertainty suffocated every corner. It was there, that night, that Daniel made a decision that would change everything. The morning after that heated argument, Daniel didn't wait any longer. He got in the car alone, without telling Julia, and drove to the animal shelter listed in the ad. His heart was pounding, as if he were about to do something crazy, and maybe he was. The shelter smelled of disinfectant mixed with wet fur. Dogs barked in unison, eager for attention. But at the end of the hallway, an eerie silence caught Daniel's attention. Inside a larger cage was the dog in the photo. A cream-colored retriever mix with a deep, calm gaze. He didn't growl, didn't jump, just watched. His eyes seemed to say, "I already know who you are." "This is Max," the volunteer said, smiling. "He's so sweet. His old family had to move and couldn't take him with them. He's still confused, but he's extremely sweet." Daniel crouched down before the railing. Max inclined his head silently. For a moment, Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. A silent, almost human connection. He cleared his throat, trying to hide his emotion. "I want to take it." "Don't you want to make an adjustment first?" the volunteer asked, surprised. "No." The answer was firm, almost impatient. Today, now. When he returned home with Max in the back seat, Julia was waiting for him on the porch, arms crossed, a look of fury on her face. "Did you really do this, Daniel?" Her voice was sharp as a razor. He opened the door, and the dog came out, wagging his tail slowly, watching everything cautiously. "I did," Daniel said simply. "If it doesn't help, at least it won't get worse." Julia sighed in exasperation. Daniel, don't we think about ourselves? We can already barely handle Isabella, and now you bring a dog. Daniel approached her, his eyes red from sleepless nights. I thought about her, Julia. Only about her. What if he's the key? What if it's this dog that makes her react? I can't ignore that. Julia didn't answer. She just went inside, still indignant. In the living room, Max lay down quietly on the carpet, observing his surroundings. He seemed to know he was in new territory. But he showed no fear, only patience. Isabella was on her mother's lap, sucking her thumb and holding her pink blanket. When the dog came in, something strange happened. The baby froze. Her eyes, which normally wandered, fixed on Max. She didn't look away. She didn't cry. She just stared. Julia frowned. Daniel, look at her. The father knelt on the floor, his heart racing. Isabella didn't blink, didn't move. Every tiny movement of the dog, the raising of its ears, the turning of its head, was followed by the baby's watchful eyes. My God, Julia murmured. She's looking like she's never looked before. Max, calm, laid his nose on the ground, emitting a deep sigh. And at that moment, something happened. Isabella gave a short cry, almost a babble, as if in response. Daniel's heart nearly leaped out of his chest. He looked at Julia in disbelief. Did you see? Did you hear? Julia hugged her daughter to her chest, frightened. I don't know what to think. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The dog's presence had brought a spark into the silence her daughter lived in, and that would be just the first flame. The following days seemed to bring a strange transformation to the house. Max, the calm-looking dog, roamed the rooms as if he'd always lived there. There was no mess, no idle barking, just a constant, silent, almost protective presence. But the most surprising thing wasn't the animal's calmness. It was the baby's reaction. Isabella, who had never responded to her parents' call, began following Max with her eyes on every move. When he walked across the carpet, she leaned forward, nearly falling off her seat, trying to keep up. And then came the first sound. Max lay down beside the crib, emitting a deep rumble, almost like a canine purr. Immediately, Isabella opened her mouth and responded with a short babble. A shaky but clear, "Ah!" Daniel was standing nearby and froze. "Julia," she answered. "She's imitating him." Julia clapped her hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Her daughter, who had never reacted to anything, was now making sounds, not to toys, not to human voices, but to the dog. The next morning, the scene repeated itself. Max slowly entered the room, wagging his tail. Isabella, clutching the pink blanket, clapped her hands in the air and laughed. It was her daughter's first laugh in almost a year. "Oh my God," Julia whispered, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I thought I'd never hear that." Daniel knelt on the floor, tears in his eyes. She's alive, Julia. Our daughter is here." But relief was accompanied by fear. The pattern was clear. Isabella only reacted to the dog. If Max left the room, she returned to silence. If Julia tried to sing, nothing. If Daniel spoke loudly, there was no response. Only when Max made deep sounds did the baby smile, laugh, or try to imitate. That night, Daniel sat with his daughter on his lap, Max lying at the foot of the chair. The baby played with the dog's ears, letting out high-pitched, repetitive squeals. Daniel watched, his heart aching. "Why only him?" he muttered, almost to himself. "What does he have that we don't?" Julia, leaning against the door, answered in a low voice. Maybe she feels something we can't give her. A frequency? I don't know." Daniel shook his head nervously. "It can't be a coincidence. It's not just affection. It's It's like she only exists when he's around. Julia remained silent. Deep down, she feared this was just a fleeting hope, a miracle that would be short-lived. But one look at the sparkle in her daughter's eyes was enough to tell something real was happening. In the days that followed, the scene repeated itself so often that there was no doubt. The baby and the dog were connected. Every deep bark, every grumble, every low growl made Isabella react. It was as if her world had finally found a doorway, and that door had 4 paws and hazel eyes. And while the girl was discovering her voice, something else was happening outside the house. On the street, an old car drove by too slowly. Unknown men watched the mansion carefully. Max, from the gate, growled every time he saw the car, as if sensing the approaching danger. The family was about to face something even more frightening than Isabella's silence. The following days were a mixture of amazement and hope. Max was no longer just a companion dog. He had become the bridge between his daughter and the world. Every time he made a deep sound, Isabella responded. Sometimes it was babbling, other times short bursts of laughter, always accompanied by bright, attentive eyes. Daniel watched in silence, his heart sinking. The joy of seeing his daughter react was immense, but along with it came a terrible fear. What if it all depended solely on the dog? He tested it several times. He called her name out loud, clapped his hands, made noises with toys. Nothing. But when Max grumbled or let out a low bark, Isabella would get excited, laugh, and try to imitate. One night, after the baby finally fell asleep, Daniel confided in Julia in the kitchen. "I think I know what's going on." She looked up wearily. "What?" "She doesn't hear us, or at least not normal sounds. But when Max makes those deep sounds, she reacts. Julia, our daughter, only hears him." Julia fell silent, the glass of water trembling in her hand. Finally, she let out a whisper. "If it's true, he didn't just bring life into the house." He revealed what no one noticed. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, his mind racing. "I need proof. I need a doctor to confirm it. But until then, I can't let that dog leave her side." Meanwhile, Max seemed to carry an invisible mission. She slept beside the crib, growled softly whenever strange footsteps echoed outside, and placed herself between the child and any noise she didn't recognize. It was on a cloudy afternoon that Daniel noticed something even more disturbing. Coming home from work, he noticed a car parked across the street. Inside, 2 men were staring at the house, barely concealing their gaze. As he approached, the car sped away, disappearing around the corner. At the gate, Max stood at attention, barking with unusual intensity. His eyes scanned the street as if he knew there was a threat. Daniel tried to hide the shiver that ran down his spine, but failed. He hugged his daughter as he entered and whispered to Julia, "They were watching us." That night, sleep wouldn't come. Daniel's heart pounded with every slap, every shadow that passed by the window. Max remained glued to the door, growling whenever a noise broke the silence. And amidst all the tension, Isabella laughed again, cooing to the dog as if nothing in the world could harm her while he was around. For Daniel and Julia, that laugh was hope. For Max, it was a responsibility. For the men prowling the house, it was only a matter of time. Dawn fell heavily, with thick clouds covering the moon. The house was plunged into its usual silence, broken only by Isabella's measured breathing in the bedroom. Julia slept restlessly beside her, while Daniel tossed and turned in bed, unable to rest since he'd noticed that suspicious car circling the street. Out of nowhere, a sharp crack. Glass shattered. Daniel bolted upright in bed, his heart racing. Before he could even speak, Max was on his feet, growling low, the hairs on his back standing on end. Another noise, the living room window being forced open, heavy footsteps pounding the wooden floor. Julia woke with a start. "Daniel, what is this?" He didn't need to answer. The sound of muffled voices confirmed it. Someone was inside the house. "Take the baby. Now," she ordered, her voice trembling. Julia ran to the crib and wrapped Isabella in the pink blanket. The girl woke confused, but didn't cry. As always, absolute silence. Max ran into the hallway, barking so loud it echoed off the walls. The intruders advanced, and the silhouettes of two hooded men appeared in the gloom. Armed with iron bars, they walked slowly toward the room. The dog didn't wait. It advanced furiously, its deep barks piercing the night. The bandits were startled, taking a step back, but then raised their weapons, ready to react. And it was at that moment that the impossible happened. Isabella, in her mother's arms, turned her head sharply. Her little eyes shone in a way they'd never seen before. And then, for the first time, the whole house heard her voice. Is... Julia almost let her daughter slip. "Daniel." She spoke. Daniel, in disbelief, watched the scene before his eyes. His daughter didn't react to the chaos, nor to the robbers' voices, nor to her mother's screams. She reacted only to Max's deep barks. And the more the dog advanced on the men, the more she laughed, the more she tried to babble, as if she had finally found a language of her own. The invaders looked at each other. Hesitant, the dog didn't back down. His deep growl filled the hallway, vibrating the walls, making the baby laugh like never before. Daniel felt his heart explode in his chest. My God, Julia, she listens to him. Only him. While Max held off the thieves in the hallway, Daniel dragged Julia and the baby into the room and locked the door. He picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed the police, his voice barely cracking as he explained the break-in. On the other side of the door, screams, sounds of fighting. Max's deep bark filled the house, and, amidst the chaos, Isabella's crystal-clear laughter, as if she were at a party, not a horror scene. The minutes felt like hours. Finally, the sirens approached. The bandits, realizing they were surrounded, fled through the same window they had entered, disappearing into the darkness. When the police entered, Daniel fell to his knees, hugging Max, who was bleeding slightly from one paw but still wagging his tail. Julia cried as she held her daughter, repeating over and over, "She said, Daniel," she said. And there, amidst the wreckage, fear and tears, a truth struck like lightning. Isabella wasn't completely deaf. She lived trapped in silence because no one had found the frequency that reached her ears. But Max did. The dog who had entered that house as a stranger was now more than a pet. He was the family's guardian, the hero who had revealed the voice of a child who seemed lost forever. Police cars lit up the street with red and blue sirens. Police officers raced through the yard, searching the area around the house. Neighbors peered out their windows, frightened by the commotion. Inside the living room, Daniel was still trembling, his arm around Max, as if he never wanted to let go. The dog was breathing heavily, his injured paw dripping small drops onto the carpet. Even so, he kept his eyes fixed on the door, alert, as if still intent on protecting the house from any threat. Julia held Isabella in her arms, crying and laughing at the same time. The baby, oblivious to the chaos, giggled softly, still imitating the deep sounds the dog made between grumbles. "Are you guys okay?" a police officer asked as he entered. Daniel looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. "We are, thanks to him." He pointed at Max, his voice breaking. The agents searched the rooms, but the intruders had already disappeared into the darkness. All that remained was the damage, broken glass, overturned furniture, and a heavy silence that soon dissolved into the family's emotional breathing. The next day, Daniel and Julia took Isabella to a pediatric hearing specialist. For the first time, they explained everything in detail: their daughter's silence, her failed attempts, her immediate reaction to the dog's sounds. The doctor listened carefully, performed some simple tests, and ultimately confirmed what Daniel had already suspected. Your daughter isn't completely deaf. She has severe hearing loss, but she responds to low frequencies. The dog probably emits sounds within that range, which is why she responds. Julia brought her hands to her mouth, tears streaming silently. Daniel closed his eyes, absorbing every word. So, she can hear, not everything, but she can. The doctor nodded. With monitoring, appropriate equipment, and the right stimuli, she can develop. And without a doubt, this dog was the key to us discovering this in time. Back home, Max was welcomed like never before. Daniel treated the wound on his paw. Julia prepared a soft bed for him in the living room. But the dog didn't seem to want any privileges. His place remained by Isabella's side. Always there, attentive, protective, patient. Days passed, and the house, once silent and sad, filled with unexpected sounds, babbling, giggles, tentative words, all directed at Max. Daniel and Julia were no longer hurt by the realization that their daughter only reacted to their son. On the contrary, they celebrated every smile, every sound, every sign of life he drew from her. One sunny afternoon, Daniel watched Isabella extend her little hands to the dog, laughing loudly, and whispered to Julia, "If it weren't for him, we might never have found out. Maybe we'd still be in the dark, believing she lived in another world." Julia squeezed his hand, moved. Sometimes, fate sends answers in the most unlikely way. Daniel looked at Max, lying beside his daughter like an eternal guardian, and felt his heart warm. For the first time in a long time, he believed the future could be better. The story of that night of the break-in was not forgotten. For the police, it was another case solved. For the neighbors, it was a frightening episode. But for that family, it was the miracle that brought the truth. Max didn't just save their lives by confronting criminals in the hallway. He revealed the secret no one had been able to uncover, Isabella's unique way of listening to the world. And in the end, the lesson became clear. Sometimes the hero doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't speak, doesn't promise anything. Sometimes he arrives on all fours, with serene eyes and a loyal heart. That dog wasn't just an animal. He was the link that transformed silence into hope, fear into love, despair into life. So, what would you have done if you were in that father's shoes? Do you believe it was just a coincidence? Or that fate really sent this dog to save this family? Leave your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to write which city you're watching from. And of course, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more exciting stories like this.